Good morning. Welcome to the ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum program. My name is Raj Sahai. The Institute for the Critical Study of Society, also known by its acronym ICSS, was formed in 2004 to preserve Marx's heritage and to support struggles for social justice and for socialism, which we hope over time would reach the stage of communism, that is, the stage of complete liberation of humanity. The opinions expressed in our forum are only of its authors, but we in ICSS are all united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, who in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach said, "The philosophers have interpreted the word in different ways. The point, however, is to change it." And the world is changing rapidly as we gather here today with two major wars involving many countries. The wars today may be to retain the hegemony of the unipolar power, but the period in which Khristian Rakovsky lived was when workers had fought to build a socialist power in the USSR. Khristian Rakovsky was born August 13, 1873, so he was just 3 years younger to Lenin, in Kotel, Bulgaria. He was a Bulgarian revolutionary who conducted subversive activities in Romania before joining the Russian Bolshevik Party and becoming a leading political figure in the Soviet Union. Because he became involved in socialist agitations, he was forbidden to attend the university at Sofia, Bulgaria. He then therefore went to France, earned a medical degree, and under a pseudonym, he contributed articles to Iskra and Pravda, the Russian revolutionary newspapers. Upon his return to Romania, Rakovsky organized a socialist party and was twice arrested and imprisoned. After the Russians released him, May 1, 1970, Rakovsky became a member of Lenin's Bolshevik Party along with Leon Trotsky. I mean, he wasn't imprisoned by the Soviet Union, it was the previous regime. He was a Trotsky ally from early on, who helped found the journal Nashe Slovo, which was edited by Julius Martov, the Menshevik leader. He served as a diplomat during the Russian Civil War. He was chairman of the Council of People's Commissars from 1990 to 1923. He was quite a prominent figure. From 1923, Rakovsky was in the left opposition. In 1929, he was exiled for his participation in Trotsky's faction. In 1934, Rakovsky, quote unquote, capitulated, within quotes because he really didn't, and swore off future Trotsky-led conspiracies. The Soviet leadership had evidence that he was lying. Despite this, Stalin permitted him to return to Moscow and gave him a responsible job. In the third Moscow trial of 1938, Khristian Rakovsky was convicted and imprisoned for 20 years, but before his term was over, he was executed in September 1941 following German invasion in June of 1941, along with 169 others in the Orel prison for activities against the state at war, by an executive order signed by Stalin at the request of Beria, the NKVD head at that time. Our speaker today needs no introduction to most of you. He's a researcher, historian, and author, Professor Grover Furr of Montclair State University in New Jersey, where he teaches medieval English literature. He has a PhD from Princeton University. However, his subject of research has been the Stalin period of Soviet Union's history, on which he has written many articles, and if my count is right, 18 books. starting with Khrushchev Lied in 2011, and his last published book is titled Khristian Rakovsky, Trotsky's Japanese Spy, which is the subject of his talk today. He will speak for about, I think, 40 minutes or so, followed by a short break for announcements, and then it will be followed by a approximately 45-minute discussion session in which you can ask questions or make comments on the subject. So please hold your questions and comments until then. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Grover Furr. All yours, Grover.
Thank you, Raj, for that very generous introduction. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. I just want to hold up here a copy of the book in question. That's it. I'm going to be speaking about it today, and I'm going to be reading my remarks because I have them all prepared. Can you still see my face?
Yes.
Okay, because of course I can't see it now. I've got the text in front of me. Okay, here we go. This should take 31 minutes, more or less. Good morning. My talk to you today is based on my new book, Khristian Rakovsky, Trotsky's Japanese Spy. I will also examine some related issues. What does it mean to know something in history? What are the forces blocking our understanding of the history of the Soviet Union during the Stalin period? How important is it that we learn the lessons that an objective study of Soviet history can teach us? But here's a question you are probably asking yourselves. Why a book on Rakovsky? He's a little-known figure. He played an insignificant role in the party or in the Soviet state. Why spend your time or our attention on him? That's a good question. My answer to it is this. The case of Khristian Rakovsky goes to the heart of the questions about Stalin and the Stalin government in the Soviet Union, and therefore it goes to the heart of our understanding of the history of the international communist movement and, in fact, of world history. Leon Trotsky is the main source of demonization of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet state during Stalin's time as leader. Nikita Khrushchev and a quarter of a century later, Mikhail Gorbachev basically agreed with, and in many cases repeated, Trotsky's accusations against Stalin while inventing new lies of their own. One of the most shocking accusations against Trotsky in the Moscow trials of the 1930s is the charge that he conspired against the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany and fascist Japan. Until 2018, apart from Rakovsky's testimony in the Third Moscow Trial of March 1938, we had no evidence to support the charge that Trotsky conspired and collaborated with the fascist Japanese regime. In 2018, the transcript of the June 1937 trial of Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky and his 7 co-defendants was published. The defendants explicitly testified that the Trotsky-led conspiracy was collaborating with fascist Japan as well as with Nazi Germany. In that same year, I discovered that most of Rakovsky's confession statements, plus his confrontations with Soviet diplomats whom he named as his co-conspirators, had been published in 2005 in a Bulgarian historical journal. I obtained these documents, studied them, transcribed them into Russian, and then translated them into English. I have reproduced them in my book. Then I studied once again some essays that Trotsky published in 1937 after Rakovsky's arrest. In these essays, Trotsky predicted exactly what Rakovsky would say in the March 1938 Third Moscow Trial. Trotsky even precisely identified by title the high-ranking officials of the Japanese government who recruited Rakovsky as a spy. Trotsky knew this because Rakovsky had informed Trotsky of all these details in secret letters. So today we have primary source evidence of Rakovsky's and Trotsky's conspiracy with the fascist Japanese regime against the Soviet Union and the international communist movement. We must also consider the anti-communist and Trotskyite claim that all these confession statements were forced on Rakovsky and upon the other Moscow Trials defendants by the NKVD investigators. This is the, quote, escape clause that the overtly pro-capitalist writers and Trotskyites insist upon in order to rescue their demonized version of Stalin and heroic view of Trotsky. So the Rakovsky case is important. If Rakovsky's confession statements are truthful, it will add to the large body of evidence that the Moscow trials were not frame-ups of innocent people, but genuine and necessary actions to prevent a fascist coup d'etat in the Soviet Union and the devastating consequences that would have had for European and indeed for world history. But if Rakovsky's confession statements were forced upon him, or perhaps even scripted by the Soviet police, this would be strong evidence that the anti-communist and Trotskyite view of the Stalin-era Soviet leadership as sinister, even crypto-fascist, is correct. Now, I have been studying the allegations of crimes against Stalin and the Soviet leadership of his day for many years. I am not apologizing for Stalin. My aim has always been to discover the truth. If Stalin committed crimes, I want to know what they were. But so far, in every case, I have found that the evidence shows that these allegations of crimes against Stalin are false. We now have a great deal of primary source evidence from former Soviet archives. This evidence enables a dedicated, objective researcher to get at the truth in ways that were impossible before. In 2008, I published my first book, Khrushchev Lied, in Russia, in the Russian language. It sold 13,000 copies and created a sensation because Nikita Khrushchev's so-called secret speech attacking Stalin at the 20th Party Congress of the CPSU on February 25th, 1956, changed the course not only of Soviet and Russian history, but of world history. In 2011, I published the English language version of this book. This book has been translated and published in a dozen languages. The fact that Khrushchev lied makes many demands of those of us on the left. Among them, why did Khrushchev lie? What was the impact of this speech on the international communist movement? How did it contribute to the abandonment of socialism in the Soviet Union and the collapse of the USSR as a state? In short, the fact that Khrushchev lied demands a complete rethinking of the history of the Soviet Union. After the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, documents from former Soviet archives, documents heretofore available only to party leaders and archivists, but not even to Soviet historians, began to appear in print. By about the year 2000, the release of documents had become a flood that continues to the present day. In 2001, Alexander Yakovlev, Mikhail Gorbachev's right-hand man, published an essay in which he attacked the whole idea of communism, socialism, and Leninism as being just as evil as Nazism. Yakovlev also revealed that, since the time of Khrushchev's secret speech, he had been a part of a conspiracy of party members dedicated to destroying Soviet socialism from within. Yakovlev briefly described how the conspirators went about doing this and boasted about their success. On September 15th, 2025, last year, I spoke to the ICSS about this conspiracy and put the transcript of my talk on my homepage. If Khrushchev had lied, so did Gorbachev and his men. Today, the documents from former Soviet archives enable us to prove that the books and articles attacking Stalin, published during Gorbachev's tenure, like those published during Khrushchev's era, are all lies. They give a deliberately fraudulent version of the history of the Soviet Union during the Stalin period. Leon Trotsky told many of the same falsehoods about Stalin that Khrushchev and his men, and then Gorbachev and Yakovlev and their men, told later. Khristian Rakovsky joined the Bolshevik Party shortly after the 1937 revolution. he was given high posts in the new Soviet government. Rakovsky was already a longtime friend of Leon Trotsky's. He joined Trotsky's faction within the party. In 1929, the year that Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Union, Rakovsky was exiled to a provincial city for his continual factional activity. On April 18, 1934, in an essay published in both Pravda and Izvestia, Rakovsky capitulated, in quotation marks here, to Stalin's line and denounced Trotskyism. Rakovsky called Trotskyism a reactionary failure and vowed to remain loyal to the party as led by Stalin. Here are a few passages from that very long article. Okay, quote, I hereby ask you to consider that no disagreements separate me from the party, that I fully and unconditionally share the general line, and that I have irrevocably broken with counter-revolutionary Trotskyism. Comrade Stalin was the embodiment of precisely this Bolshevik ideological irreconcilability, organizational discipline, unity of word and deed. It was against those principles that the opposition's attack was essentially directed when it attacked the person of Comrade Stalin. In my person, one of the last representatives of the opposition declares today that precisely what we considered shortcomings in the leadership of Comrade Stalin are his virtues. Together with the entire party and working class, I repeat, only with a leader who possesses the ideological irreconcilability, political insight, and firm will of Comrade Stalin could the land of the Soviets cope with the most difficult task of socialist reconstruction. Rakovsky criticizes, quote, the thesis of the impossibility of building socialism on one country. He attacks the opposition for advocating factions within the party, noting that they had agreed to follow the party program, which had outlawed factions at the 10th Party Congress in 1921. Rakovsky closes by referring to his long-standing friendship with Trotsky, saying that their, quote, paths have sharply diverged, end quote. However, he said nothing about Trotsky's conspiracy. As I show in my book, the Soviet leadership already had good evidence that Rakovsky was still actively involved in Trotsky's conspiracy. Nevertheless, on March 17, 1934, Stalin supported Rakovsky's request to be permitted to return to Moscow and be given a responsible job. On December 1, 1934, Leningrad party leader Sergei Mironovich Kirov was murdered outside his office at party headquarters. The murderer was caught on the spot and soon named his co-conspirators. Some of these persons then admitted that they were in touch with Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, former top party leaders expelled for factionalizing against the Stalin leadership, but later readmitted to the party and given responsible posts. Continuing investigation into the network of conspiracies eventually led to the public Moscow trials of August 1936, January 1937, and March 1938. During the 1936 and 1937 Moscow trials, Rakovsky went far beyond merely criticizing the defendants. He called for their executions before they had even testified. In my book, I present the first reprinting of Rakovsky's articles and the first complete translations of them into English. On August 19, 1936, the public trial of Zinoviev, Kamenev, and others in the block of conspirators that included Zinovievites, Trotskyites, and rightists began in Moscow. The verdict of death against the defendants was handed down on the evening of August 23rd. Yet on August 21st, only 2 days into the trial, Rakovsky published an essay in Pravda titled, quote, There Must Be No Mercy, end quote. Rakovsky stated that the accused, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Trotsky too, were guilty of murdering Kirov and of organizing the assassination attempts against Stalin and the other party leaders. Concerning Leon Trotsky, Rakovsky wrote as follows, quote, There is one person whose name is repeated in all the testimonies. There is one person whose bloody hands hold the threads of the entire terrorist organization. A person who, to our great regret, is absent from the dock, but who should be nailed in the first place to the pillory. I am speaking of Trotsky. Today, the mask has finally been torn from Trotsky's face. It is now clear to everyone, including me, Rakovsky, who for many years maintained a personal friendship with him, and who, being in the ranks of the opposition, believed in his political honesty, that Trotsky was always an alien element in the party. Trotsky is a political adventurer, a scoundrel and a bastard, whose methods of action are to sow political corruption in the party by means of duplicity and deception, and to organize the Soviet power by organizing the vile murder of its leaders. End quote. Rakovsky ended his essay with a fervent call to execute the defendants. Here, quote, "For the Trotskyite Zinovievite murderers, for the organizers of the attempt on the life of our beloved leader, Comrade Stalin, for the Trotskyite agents of German Gestapo, there must be no mercy. They must be shot." End quote. That's what Rakovsky wrote. On August 20th, when Rakovsky wrote this article, most of the defendants had not yet had a chance to testify. Yet Rakovsky was already calling for their executions. In Shakespeare's play Hamlet, a character says, quote, "Methinks the lady doth protest too much," end quote, meaning that someone's excessive denial and over-the-top language suggests that they are hiding the truth and are actually guilty. At the December 1936 Central Committee meeting, Stalin related some examples of, quote, "protesting too much" by high-ranking party members who had tried to conceal their guilt. I quote some of Stalin's remarks because they suggest a motive for Rakovsky's, quote, "premature condemnation of his former opposition colleagues." Okay, now I'm going to quote from the December 1936 Central Committee meeting. Stalin: "When Kamenev and Zinoviev declared in 1932 that they had renounced their mistakes and declared that the party's position was correct, we believed them. We believed them because we supposed that a communist, former or current, is accustomed to ideological struggle, that this ideological communist, former or current, is struggling for his idea. If a person has openly said that he adheres to the party line, then the party considers that this means that person really has renounced his mistakes and now stands on the party's positions. We believed them. We were mistaken. We were mistaken, Comrade Bukharin. Bukharin, yes, yes. Stalin: "When Smirnov and Pyatakov declared that they were renouncing their views, openly declared this in the press, we believed them. We believed them, gave them the order of Lenin, moved forward, and were mistaken. Right, Comrade Bukharin?" Bukharin: "True, true, I said the same thing." Stalin: "When Sosnovsky made a declaration that he was renouncing his mistakes, he explained the reason for this, and explained well from a Marxist point of view. We believed him, and really did say to Bukharin, quote, 'You want to take him on at Izvestia? Good. He writes well. Take him. We shall see what comes of it.' End quote. We were mistaken. Believe in the sincerity of people after that. We have drawn a conclusion. Do not take former oppositionists at their word. We must not be naive, and Lenin taught us that to be naive in politics is to commit a crime. We don't want to be criminals. For this reason, we have drawn a conclusion. Don't believe the word of a single former oppositionist. When we arrested Pyatakov's wife, we gave him, Pyatakov, all the confessions to read. He said that Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Rakovsky were slandering him in their confessions. That's what others also said when they had just been arrested or taken to trial. He came to us and said," this is Pyatakov, "Well, how can I justify myself? They are lying, they want to ruin me." End quote. We tried to talk to him. "All right," we said, "but you are the public prosecutor against the socialist revolutionaries. Agree to be the public prosecutor against them." "Good," said Pyatakov with pleasure. He started to prepare for this. But we thought about it further and decided that this would not be good. Still, this attempt started to convince us for a minute that maybe this man is right. Therefore, we said to Pyatakov, quote, "No, even though it was we who suggested that you be the public prosecutor, this won't work." He became sad. "Then how can I prove that I am right?" said Pyatakov. "Let me shoot with my own hand all those whom you sentenced to death. All this filth, all these swine. What other proof do you need? Publish in the press, both after the sentence and after the sentence has been carried out, that it was Comrade Pyatakov who carried out the sentence." This also made us, now Stalin again, this also made us hesitate somewhat. But on the other hand, we have never made public who carries out the sentences. And we decided that if we did that, no one would believe that we had not forced him to do it. Pyatakov: "Then what am I to do? Give me a solution. Let me write an article against the Trotskyites." "Good, write it." He wrote an article in which he really smashed Trotsky and the Trotskyites. As an aside, this is Furr now, this is just what Rakovsky did, right? Stalin again. But after we questioned about 50 people at least, they really turned Pyatakov inside out. It turns out that he's a monster of a person. So why did he agree to be the public prosecutor? Why did he agree to shoot his comrades himself? It turns out that they have a rule like this: if your fellow Trotskyite is arrested and has begun to give up the names of others, he must be destroyed. You can see what kind of hellish joke this comes to. Believe after that in the sincerity of former oppositionists. We can't take former oppositionists at their word, even when they volunteer to shoot their friends with their own hands. End quote. Stalin then addresses Bukharin. Stalin: "You can't just stand up and say that we don't trust you, we don't believe in my Bukharin's sincerity. That's old stuff now. And the events of the last 2 years have obviously proven this to us. And as for trusting in former oppositionists, we have shown them so much trust. We should be flogged for that maximum trust, that boundless trust that we have showed to them. Moreover, former oppositionists have taken an even more serious step in order to retain even a little bit of trust on our part and demonstrate once more their sincerity. Some people have begun to use suicide. In reality, this is also a means of pressuring the party. Lomenadze committed suicide. He wanted to tell us by this act that he was right, that we were interrogating him in vain and subjecting him to suspicion in vain. And what happened? It turned out that he was in a block with these people. That's why he killed himself, to cover up their tracks. So that is a political killing, a means for former oppositionists, enemies of the party, to strike at the party, to destroy its vigilance, to deceive it one last time before their death by means of suicide and leave the party in a stupid position. That's the end of Stalin quotations. We know that Stalin is correct here. We know that Lomenadze was indeed in Trotsky's secret bloc of rights and Trotskyites, because Pierre Brouet, at the time the world's leading Trotskyite historian, while searching in the Harvard Trotsky archive, discovered letters between Trotsky and his son Leon Sedov, in which Lomenadze is named as a soon-to-be member of the bloc, the Trotskyite bloc. Stalin concluded this speech with the following words, quote, "After all these facts that I've told you about, and there are a great many of them, we have to look carefully into things. We have to look carefully, objectively, quietly. We do not want anything except the truth. We do not want, we will not permit anyone to be ruined by anybody. We want to seek out and find the whole truth, objectively, honestly, with courage. So do not try to frighten us with weeping or with suicide." End quote. Notice what Stalin says here. We, the party, the communists, must investigate carefully and objectively. Quote, "We do not want anything but the truth. We want to seek out and find the whole truth objectively, honestly, with courage." End quote. This is the attitude that every communist, every Marxist, including all of us here, should have. However, Despite Rakovsky's over-the-top protestations, demanding the executions of persons against whom the evidence had not yet been presented and who had not yet even testified, Stalin and the party leadership retained Rakovsky in his official position. The second public Moscow trial of the anti-Soviet Trotskyite Center took place between January 23rd and January 30th, 1937. At the trial on January 25th, defendant Yakov Naumovich Drobnis identified Rakovsky as a member of Trotsky's terrorist and sabotage group. On the same day, Nikolai Yezhov, head of the NKVD, wrote to Stalin with quotations from the confessions of many defendants who had named Rakovsky. Once again, Rakovsky wrote an article to Pravda. Like his article of August 21st, 1936, this bloodthirsty article by Rakovsky calls for the execution of the defendants. Even though the trial was only in its second day, most of the defendants had not yet had the opportunity to say anything, and most of the evidence against them had yet to be presented. Once again, Rakovsky condemned his co-conspirators. But this time, with all the evidence against him, Rakovsky's bloodthirsty draft article could not save him from arrest. After his arrest, at first Rakovsky professed innocence. Then he confessed to participation in Trotsky's clandestine conspiracy. And then, in September 1937, Rakovsky began to confess to having been recruited by high-ranking members of the government of Japan to be a spy for Japan at Trotsky's urging. Rakovsky identified several persons in the Soviet Foreign Service as Japanese agents like himself on behalf of Trotsky's conspiracy, as he himself was. The Soviet investigators did not know about these men beforehand. They were not arrested until after Rakovsky had exposed them. In return, at the March 1938 Moscow trial, Rakovsky was not sentenced to death, but to 20 years imprisonment. When Leon Trotsky learned of Rakovsky's arrest in late January 1937, he did something strange. I believe that I was the first to discover that Trotsky himself revealed Rakovsky's espionage for the Japanese, even before Rakovsky himself had begun to confess about it. The details of Trotsky's outing of Rakovsky are in my book. Anti-communists and Trotskyites claim that Rakovsky was threatened or tortured into falsely claiming that the Japanese had recruited him. Why would anyone think that the NKVD had forced Rakovsky to tell the story of how he was recruited by the Japanese and named the persons in the Japanese government who had recruited him when these details were kept secret at the trial? The reason is simple. Both pro-capitalist anti-communist scholars and Trotskyites are committed to demonizing Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union during the time he led it. The overt pro-capitalist anti-communists have always striven to make the communist movement appear to be morally monstrous, so that capitalism, no matter how horrible, will appear to be, if not positively good, at least the lesser evil. As for the Trotskyites, since Trotsky's own day, the whole Trotskyite movement has been built around demonizing Stalin. Without the figure of the evil Stalin, there would be no reason for Trotskyism to exist. Still, the fact that these people are biased does not in itself prove that they are wrong. Therefore, in the remaining part of my talk, I will discuss Rakovsky and the problem of historical knowledge. How do we know that Rakovsky was not threatened or tortured into making false confessions? More broadly, what does it mean to know something in history? How can we gain knowledge about the past, specifically this past, the history of the world's first socialist state that was aiming for communism? In my book, I present two types of evidence of Rakovsky's guilt. First, there are Rakovsky's confessions. They are ignored in the Russian original and have never before been published in translation. Second, there are some unguarded statements by Trotsky himself that reveal that Rakovsky was indeed carrying out his, Trotsky's, instructions and had informed him, Trotsky, of what he had done. The evidence of Rakovsky's guilt has been and will continue to be denied on erroneous or fraudulent grounds. Anti-communists will deny it because Rakovsky's guilt dismantles the long-standing accusation that the Soviet government, Stalin, framed the defendants in the Moscow trials. Trotskyites will continue to deny Rakovsky's guilt because the cult of Trotsky, to which they adhere, requires denying that Trotsky conspired with Germany and Japan, among his other crimes. Both overt anti-communists and Trotskyites reject as fraudulent the huge body of evidence of Trotsky's guilt. They also want to convince others to reject this evidence. Ignorance of what evidence is and how to interpret it is their ally in this endeavor to fool themselves and to dupe others. For this reason, I thought it best to preface my book with a discussion of the issues concerning evidence. Because of time constraints today, I will be very brief. I refer you to the introduction to my book for a fuller discussion. First, there is in principle no such thing as a smoking gun. All evidence can be explained in multiple ways. Second, all the evidence of Trotsky's collaboration with Germany and Japan is circumstantial. By evidence, I mean primary source evidence. The term primary source means evidence that is as close to the subject under study as possible. Third, unless objective criteria are established and then rigorously adhered to, the researcher will almost certainly find what his historical preconceptions, his historical paradigm, his bias tells him to look for. In doing so, he will either ignore or misconstrue anything that does not fit his preconceived ideas. This logical fallacy is known as confirmation bias. What a researcher agrees to accept as evidence and to exclude as evidence is too often a reflection of historical paradigm. The problem of, quote, acceptable evidence is simply magnified in the case of a charge of a secret conspiracy, such as Rakovsky confessed to. There are serious problems with any kind of evidence. Confessions in or out of court might be fabricated. Documentary evidence can be forged. In general, there is no kind of evidence that cannot be forged or faked. Neither is there any kind of evidence that can by itself provide conclusive proof of any act. In all my research, I assume that the larger the number of individual items of evidence that are all consistent with a single interpretation, the less is the chance that they and that interpretation are the results of some kind of orchestration or fabrication according to a preconceived plan. When combined with evidence from documents that were never directly related to any prosecution and never intended for publication, the likelihood of fabrication becomes very small indeed. Concerning the charge that Leon Trotsky collaborated with the Germans and Japanese, there are two possible hypotheses. Hypothesis number one, Trotsky did collaborate with Germany and Japan. Hypothesis number two, the evidence of Trotsky's collaboration has been fabricated, faked, scripted, or in some way produced so as to make it look like an innocent man, Trotsky, was collaborating with Germany and Japan. These are the two possible hypotheses. We must decide which hypothesis is correct on the basis of evidence as well. Then the question becomes, what is the evidence for each hypothesis? As always, if and when evidence refuting hypothesis number one or corroborating hypothesis number two should come to light in the future, or if a better interpretation of the evidence we already have is presented, we must be prepared to revise and, if necessary, reverse our conclusion. Suppose there were no evidence that Trotsky collaborated with Germany and Japan. Would that mean that Trotsky did not collaborate? No, it wouldn't. It would mean that if this were a trial at law, Trotsky should be acquitted for lack of evidence. However, we must remember that a verdict of innocent at trial does not mean the defendant actually is innocent. That is, did not commit the crime of which he or she is accused. It means that the prosecution was unable to prove the defendant guilty. So even if there were no evidence that Trotsky collaborated with Germany and Japan, that would not mean that he didn't do so. It would mean that either he did not collaborate, or he did collaborate but was careful enough to leave no evidence behind. In Trotsky's case, however, A, we have a great deal of evidence of collaboration. B, there is no evidence of any conspiracy to fabricate this evidence. None. And Khrushchev era, Gorbachev era, Yeltsin era, and now Putin-Medvedev era anti-communist Russian researchers have been looking for such evidence for decades, and they have had all the Soviet archives at their disposal. Therefore, hypothesis number one must stand. On the evidence now available, Trotsky did collaborate with Germany and Japan. The Moscow trials have never been disproven. No one has ever presented any evidence that the defendant's testimony was compelled by torture or threats, or that the defendants were innocent of the crimes to which they confessed at trial. No one ever. In 1988, Rakovsky was rehabilitated by Gorbachev's men. In my book, I study the rehabilitation report and show that it is a fraud. In 2025, my Moscow-based colleague Vladimir Bobrov and I published an article about this in the online journal Cultural Logic. It is linked near the top of my homepage. A great deal of evidence establishes Trotsky's and Rakovsky's guilt. There is no evidence that refutes it. That evidence is presented here to the reader who is determined to be objective in their assessment of the evidence and to question their preconceived ideas. This is the most challenging task of all. We should be concerned with the question of Rakovsky's and Trotsky's collaboration with fascist Japan because we need to know the truth about the history of the Soviet Union, the world's first workers' state. Unless we know the truth about the successes and also the failures of the Soviet Union, we will never learn the lessons this history has to teach us. Academic researchers will never tell us because they are not asking the questions we need answered, and because academic research into communist history is designed to slander the communist project. Trotskyite writers will never tell us because they are committed to the cult of Leon Trotsky. So we must do this important job ourselves. Otherwise, we will at best be doomed to repeat those errors. This is why I study Soviet history of the Stalin period. Thank you for listening. End of talk.
Thank you, Grover, for your talk and information on this case of Khristian Rakovsky. So what we're going to do now, we're going to make some announcements and then go to the question answer period. ICSSmarxist.org is our website where you can sign up and you will get a notification when the program comes out, topic, etc. And where you can also make contribution. We're trying to enlarge our effort in this time, as you know, is changing very rapidly with all the changes in the world. So we want to strengthen our program. So please be generous and contribute to us so that we can get the expert help that we need, technical help to reach to more audiences, etc. Now, what we're going to do as we proceed, we're going to have a question answer period in which each participant gets to raise his or her hand, as I see this one hand already raised. And to raise the hand, you just have to go to the react button, and that will allow you to raise the hand. I will not necessarily go in the sequence in which the hands are raised, but I promise you I will try to get to everybody. And then when you get your chance, please keep in mind this is a comradely discussion. Language should be watched, no matter how strong your emotion. be duly respectful to each other, and then also time limit is 2 minutes, so keep an eye on your time. We will not cut you off exactly 2 minutes, but let you finish the sentence, but please discipline yourself. There's no limit for the speaker to speak in response. He can also choose not to respond. So, with that said, oh, yeah, the upcoming program for next Sunday, we're going to have a very exciting program. Amaresh Mishra is a journalist and writer, author, and he's got very good reach into both Iran and Israel, and is an analyst. He will provide what is going on in this intense conflict between United States, Israel on one side, which attacked Iran, and Iran's response to it, and how that is going on. What are the consequences of this thing? It's a dangerous moment in history. That said, we'll go to the first question, and that is Sharon Rose. Sharon, please unmute yourself. If you haven't, please proceed. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Grover, for explaining the process of principled research. But I can't help but wonder, can you say more about what Trotsky actually did, what the conspirators did in support of the Nazis and the Japanese imperialists? It helps. Well, I mean, I want to understand it, but also in terms of talking to other people about that, it helps to have some, concrete examples.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So more and more documents get published all the time now. So if you were asking me this 10 years ago, or maybe, then I would say, well, I would say this: the transcripts of the three public Moscow trials of 36, 37, and 38 are not only available in English, but they can be bought very inexpensively. They can be downloaded from the internet. And there are a lot of details about what the Trotskyites were and that were doing in the transcripts of those trials. Now, since in the last 10 years, beginning before that, but particularly in the last 10 years, there's been several efforts to locate and publish really an enormous number of confessions and interrogations of people connected with these three trials. And for example, let me just give this one example, concerning the 1936 trial of the Rights and some Nazi conspirators. The main defendant was a man named Smirnov. Okay, and he was the leader of the Trotskyite movement within the illegal Trotskyite movement within the Soviet Union. We know that because Pierre Brouet, once again, the Trotskyite researcher, in 1980 discovered some letters between Trotsky and Trotsky's son, Leon Sedov, discussing this block of rights and Trotskyites, and they specifically named Smirnov. So Smirnov was probably the leading defendant at the August 1936 trial. Now, after the trial, but before the verdict had been delivered by the judges, Smirnov wrote two letters, and those letters were published a couple of years ago. One to his wife and one to his daughter. And in the letter to his daughter, he says a number of things. He says, get out of the Trotskyite movement. That's the first thing he says. But then of more interest than that, he says, it is true that the defendants in this trial who were accused of being Nazis really were Nazis. That was not. He says that was true, and he also says that the Trotskyite movement has been corrupted, okay, has been infiltrated by Nazis, and therefore I want you to tell all of our fellow conspirators that it's time to get out of this movement. So, that's interesting. And since almost none of these confessions and statements that have come out in the last 10 years have been translated into English. I mean, I've translated some of them, but I haven't published them yet. And there are way too many to translate them all. I still think that the best thing to do is to read the transcripts of the 3 Moscow trials. And no anti-communist, let alone Trotskyist scholar, has ever come up with any evidence that the accusations made and the confessions made at those trials were false. So they cover an awful lot of territory: sabotage, murder. Of course, Sergei Kirov was murdered. Plotting with fascists within the Soviet Union, including German engineers, German experts who had been hired to help industrialize, but who were really German spies, and things like that. And you can read all about them in the transcripts of the Moscow trials.
Okay, thank you. Daniel Borgstrom, please. Go ahead.
Yes. I understand that at the end of World War II, a huge amount of German Nazi documents were released. And I wonder what evidence or what kind of evidence there might be in those documents. And also, maybe there must be something in the Japanese documents.
Mm-hmm.
And possibly even in CIA documents, which have come to light, and probably in other from other archives as well, what has come to light, principally German and Japanese. Thank you.
Okay. Well, here's the story. I get asked this question a lot. I don't know you at all, Mr. Borgstrom, but this question is commonly used as a kind of form of denial by anti-communists and Trotskyites, as though somehow or other these conspiracies could not have existed unless evidence of them turned up in the German or Japanese archives. The fact of the matter is that nobody's ever found any evidence of these conspiracies in the German or Japanese archives, or at least I haven't heard of any. But the fact also is that conspirators don't write down the evidence of their conspiracies. In a couple of my books and one of my articles, I have some quotations from the CIA and from an article in the Comintern magazine back in the 30s that say, whatever you do, make sure that all this information is kept in your head only word of mouth. Don't write anything down. So that we shouldn't expect to find evidence of these conspiracies in German or Japanese archives. However, we have a great deal of other evidence. And let me just say this, and I've been talking about that and publishing about that. Let me say just one other thing. If someone were to claim sometime in the future that he or she had discovered a document in the German or Japanese archives about Trotsky's conspiracy, In my opinion, we should then be very suspicious, because that would be a violation of conspiratorial activity. I personally would suspect that that had been planted if it were ever discovered.
Okay, so we have 3 hands raised. Jean, you're next, followed by Mehmet. Unmute yourself, Jean.
Okay, I'm on now, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Grover, thanks so much for this. I'm always kind of in awe of your scholarship here, and there's so much material you've gone over. It's great. But I have to confess, I haven't looked at things in that depth, but I've read enough and seen enough to look at Stalin and say that, Stalin, more than any other individual, is responsible for the defeat of Nazi imperialism and the preservation of socialist property relations in the Soviet Union. And that places him absolutely in the forefront of historical figures. So, I really appreciate all your work, but for me, I look at what Stalin has objectively done in history, and he's one of the great men in history, and certainly justifies all the work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Please respond, Grover. Grover, you have something to respond to?
No, thanks.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Mehmet, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Grover, for coming and explaining the issues, and also thank you for your work where you meticulously go over the evidence. And in response to your response to the question about not having evidence in the Western media, I just wanted to give an example supporting what you said, that, when you don't have an evidence does not mean that it did not happen. In the Armenian genocide that happened in the Ottoman Empire, there was the head of the government, Talat Pasha, who was sending telegrams to the troops to kill any and all Armenians that they could round up with. But he was, I don't know if it was a Talat Pasha or Enver Pasha, the other responsible. And then, but he had the telegram office install a node of the telegram close to his office, to his home. He would first of all send a telegram to everybody saying that do not touch the Armenians. They are so good. Don't ever kill them. You have to be very soft on them. This is not a war against them. You must protect them and you must preserve them and everything. Just after his telegram, he would run to his home 10 minutes away and then send another telegram saying, disregard my orders and burn this telegram. And these were all not known until 1 or 2 people who had not taken the order to destroy the telegram were found. But most of the deniers look at the original official telegrams that say, don't do anything to the Armenians, just treat them softly, treat them well, and they take that as the example. Now, the important thing is that Turkey also says that all the archives are open for the genocide, so there is nothing coming out. But then they don't mention that an archival study of a historian is not just you walk in the door and there it is, you grab it and you publish it and you're done. It's not like that. Okay, just the last minute is that in order for you to do an investigation in the archive, in Turkish archives, you have to give a form. You have to request that you become an employee of the Turkish army. That is how they grant you the, so that you can do research in an archive. So I appreciate your work in researching the archives in situations like this. Thank you.
Okay, let me comment a little bit. Thanks, Mehmet. Let me just say something about archival evidence. When I answered a few minutes ago, I said, well, there isn't anything in the German and Japanese archives. Well, let me just say it's not quite true. There are a few things. One is the Arau telegram. The Arau telegram was published under Khrushchev. When Khrushchev's men were looking for evidence against Stalin and failing to find it, they actually published a telegram which was in the Japanese language, which had been translated, which they got a translator to translate, which showed that Marshal Tukhachevsky was in collaboration with the Japanese army. Now, the people who published this document in their report to Khrushchev were sent to look for evidence that Tukhachevsky and company were innocent. They were not sent to look for evidence that they were guilty, but they came across this document and they published it. But there's no way they would have published it along with the accompanying, explanations unless they thought it was accurate, because it was exactly the opposite of what Khrushchev had sent them into the archives to find. Second thing is, in 1944, the Russian general Vlasov, who had deserted the Soviet army and joined the Nazi army, had an interview with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the German SS. And the transcript of this has been preserved, and I have published it actually in one or two of my articles. And Himmler comes right out and asks Vlasov, how was it that Tukhachevsky's conspiracy failed? How was it that it failed? So Himmler knew, as the leadership of the Nazi party, of course, knew that the Tukhachevsky's conspiracy was genuine. Vlasov really didn't have an answer to that. Of course, Vlasov had not been a senior figure in the Red Army at the time of the Tukhachevsky conspiracy. But Heinrich Himmler came out and asked him, how was it that the Tukhachevsky conspiracy failed? And so you might say, well, what's that got to do with Trotsky? Well, in 2018, the transcript of the trial of Marshal Tukhachevsky and the 7 other high-ranking Red Army commanders, which was held on June the 11th, 1937, the transcript was finally published. And a few years ago, 2021, I think, I and my 2 colleagues, Vladimir Bobrov and Sven-Erik Holmström, published a book on the Tukhachevsky affair and Trotsky's involvement in it. And at the end of that book, we published the only translation of that transcript of the trial of Tukhachevsky and company that has been published in any language, and it's there. And they go into detail about their collaboration with Trotsky, their collaboration with the Germans, and Trotsky's collaboration with the Germans. And they're not being interrogated here. They are actually discussing that among themselves in the context of this trial. So it's not quite true that we don't have evidence of conspiracies from the German and Japanese archives. But that's so far that's what we have. That's why I mentioned in my talk that there are these 2 hypotheses. One hypothesis is Trotsky collaborated with the Germans and Japanese, and we have a tremendous amount of evidence, almost all of it, confessions, interrogation evidence, that he did collaborate. The second possibility, hypothesis number 2, is that Trotsky didn't collaborate, that all of these documents were faked. But we don't have any evidence to support that hypothesis, the hypothesis that all of this evidence against Trotsky was faked. There's no evidence that it was. So therefore, if you're going to go by the evidence as opposed to by your preconceived ideas, you have to come to the conclusion that Trotsky was in fact conspiring with the Germans and Japanese.
Okay, thank you. Jim Hillier is next. Jim, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Right. Before I start, I just realised it looks like I've got some kind of Nazi thing behind me. It's a Spanish Civil War poster. There's a peasant's foot.
I was wondering if you're a supporter.
Especially with the short hair. You know, never tell. No, it's a Spanish Civil War poster. Very impressive, Grover. I also am in awe of the detail that lies behind your evidence, lies behind your work. Can I ask a question a bit more generally? Yeah. You said, quoting, I think, Shapiro to his daughter or his wife, I'm not sure, saying, get out of the Trotskyist movement.
Yeah.
These people really are Nazis.
Yes.
Okay. It wasn't clear to me whether he was referring to the whole bloody lot of them or whether there was infiltration of it. And my meta question, if you like, is how did these people end up there? And I know people can change. Volkov was presumably an honorable soldier at one point. Trotsky, to quote Stalin, fought well in October, didn't do much else, but fought well in October. At some stage, he was a revolutionary.
Somewhat?
At some stage, he must have been a revolutionary. Perhaps less Bolshevik than he pretended. But to get to the stage, less than 2 decades later, where he is collaborating with fascism in a desperate attempt to get rid of Stalin's leadership. Wow, that's a huge leap, isn't it? And I know people do it. It's not, every revolutionary movement has its renegades. Every revolutionary movement has its traitors. Every revolutionary movement has its infiltrated spies. And you don't always know. But what do you think is going on here? Rakovsky, was he a genuine revolutionary who went wrong? Or was he a wrong and right from the start, or somewhere between the two? What's your view?
Well, Trotsky personally had an interesting and somewhat complicated career, but you're right. He joined the Bolsheviks before the revolution, shortly before the revolution, and served as commander of the Army and Navy, had important posts, and so forth, up to shortly before Lenin's death. And then there was what you might call a power struggle. I don't think it was simply a power struggle. It was a struggle over what direction is the Soviet Union going to take. So setting Trotsky's personality aside for a moment, I think we need to put ourselves back imaginatively in the period around the time that Lenin died, in the early 1920s and right after he died. The Bolsheviks, like virtually all socialists at the time, had expected that there would be revolutions in advanced industrial societies, whatever you meant by that. That's what they suspected. Go back and read Marx, and that's what he suspected too. And within a few years of the Russian Revolution, it became clear that wasn't about to happen. They were crushed. The abortive revolutions in Europe, in Germany and in Hungary, let's say, in Finland, were crushed. And so then what do? Now, I can't psychoanalyze Trotsky, but certainly there were lots of people arguing over what is the future course of the Soviet Union in the face of this failure of revolutions in advanced industrial societies to take place. And this was an extremely important question. In fact, to the people at that time, this is the most important question in the world. I mean, the fate of the world's working class, the fate of the entire international communist movement is at stake. And it's largely going to be determined to a greater or lesser extent in the course that the Soviet Union, the world's only socialist state, chooses. So that we shouldn't be surprised that there was passionate discussion and passionate disagreement over this. Now, in March 1921, at the 10th Party Congress, at Lenin's instigation, a resolution was passed that said no factions, no more factionalizing. Everybody, once the party's line is laid down, no more groups with a separate political position are to be permitted. And everybody has to follow the leadership of the party. Well, the leadership of the party ended up being Stalin and some associates, and then ultimately, basically, Stalin. But the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of concern that the fate of the world's socialist movement, communist movement, world's working class was at stake here, led many people, many party members, not the majority or anything like that, but a significant number of people to ignore the resolution of 1921, the Party Congress, outlawing factions. One tactic that the opposition groups, let's call them that because that's what they call themselves, and they've been known by that name. The one tactic the opposition group picked was to say, well, the leadership is a faction too. The leadership of the party is also a faction, and therefore, since they have a faction, we should also have a faction. But that's not what the resolution over factionalism meant. It meant that the leadership of the party sets the party line, and there shouldn't be any other factions arguing for their own program. And it's for that reason that the Trotskyites and Rights were expelled, and most of them were readmitted, but and that Trotsky was exiled from the Soviet Union. Now, then you have crash industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, and in 1932 to 33, a very severe famine. So like three, very disruptive factors going on at the beginning of the 1930s. And some people in the party felt that the Soviet Union is not going to be able to withstand. They're not going to be able to overcome these difficulties, that the country may fall apart, that the capitalists may invade and overthrow the government at this time of disruption. And when that did not happen, well, when it was going on, some of the people who had been involved in factions felt that it was time to revive those factions. Now the failure of the Stalin leadership is becoming clear, they thought. But the Soviet Union got through those crucial years. And then you had another division within the people who had been in the opposition. Many of them dropped out of opposition and stayed out of opposition, but a few said that, well, now we can't possibly get rid of Stalin because through normal channels, because the Stalin policies, the policies associated with his leadership, seem to have worked. Now the only way to get rid of him is by assassination. Okay, and so there by degrees, this disaffection, these disagreements over the future course of the Soviet Union became, in the minds of some people, the only thing to do was to get rid of the Stalin leadership by any means. And that was Trotsky's position. Anything goes. Any tactic is good. And that meant, of course, enlisting the capitalist powers, because if the opposition is successful in stimulating some sort of coup d'état or civil war within Russia, then certainly the capitalists will want to charge in and destroy the Soviet state, and so we have to make deals with them, in advance. So something along those lines was going on in the minds of many people. Now, I'm excluding Trotsky here, because he became sort of the focal point of most of the oppositionists, because he was abroad, so he had, he could publish, he could do a lot of things that oppositionists within the Soviet Union couldn't do.
Okay, thank you. Bill Mayer is next. Bill, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for your talk, Grover. I've enjoyed your work for many years. It's revolutionary, I feel. It's so critical what you're doing. I mean, this changed the world back in the 40s and 30s and 40s. And the speech, Khrushchev's speech, turned the world against communism, against the Soviet Union, against Stalin. And if in your book, Khrushchev Lied, changed my life, and I appreciate what you did. Not only for the history, but because of the way you outlined, the way you search for truth. In that book, I refer many people to that part of your book where we can see the different levels of how you gather truth. Thank you for that. I also want to mention that there is a movie called The Moscow Trials. It's actually called The Trial, and it's by Sergei Lesnitsa, an anti-communist Ukrainian filmmaker. And the book is just factual, raw footage from the trials. It's fascinating. And the movie did not turn any viewer against the Soviet Union. I think it created the opposite effect than what the director wanted. It was very realistic, and you could see the way people were not being pressured when there's in the testimonies and stuff. So you just answered a lot of my questions in your last answer to the last question, but I'm curious. You seem to be a loner out there in the world doing this type of work, and I wonder if you can recommend anybody else that does this work like you and helps expose the lies that took place around that time period in history. I know this forum has had some of the speakers on for sure, and Gabriel Raquel for one for sure, and this whole organization is looking for the truth. Can you help me sort of suggest who else is working with you or who you respect in this kind of work? Thank you very much.
Well, I wish I could. There are a couple of researchers in Russia whose work I read, but their works are in Russian. And, you kind of have to go to some trouble to get them. And now that with the Ukraine war, the fact that you can't receive mail from Russia and so forth, or at least packages, it's not easy to get them. So the bottom line is no, I don't know of anyone else who is doing the kind of thing that I'm doing. And I think one important reason is this. Almost everybody who seriously studies the history of the Soviet Union is an academic, is teaching Russia or Soviet history, or teaching in a history department someplace. And the phenomena that I call the anti-Stalin paradigm, that dictates that you cannot say that Stalin didn't commit crimes, that you have to attack Stalin, even if you don't have any evidence. That paradigm is a ruling paradigm in academic history. You can't get published by leading journals. You can't get published by university presses or commercial presses. if you don't take that position, if you don't attack Stalin, you don't agree that Stalin was a dictator, which he wasn't. You don't agree that that the Moscow trials and the other trials, the other condemnation, the other trials of oppositionists were faked. If you don't demonize Stalin in some way or other, you simply can't be published, which means you can't have a career in the field of Soviet history. The reason I can do, and that's true in Russia, by the way, too, there have been a few academics in Russia who have managed to hold on to their academic positions despite their the fact that they don't kowtow to this anti-Stalin paradigm. But there aren't many. And outside of Russia, I don't think there are any. I have never seen any. On the other hand, there is a strong presence in the field of Soviet history in the West, and perhaps more widely, perhaps in Asia too, but I'm not that familiar with Asia. It's certainly in the West, in Russia too, and in Europe, East and West, and in the United States, other English-speaking countries. There's a strong presence permitted to Trotskyite researchers. Trotskyite researchers, of course, attack Stalin. And even though they have a somewhat different angle, they profess loyalty or to the ideals of communism and revolution and so forth, that is tolerated as long as they're anti-Stalin. And so there are journals and presses that publish books. And as a result, there are Trotskyite professors, tenured professors at various institutions in the United States and the UK and in other European countries who can make a career. It's possible to make a career as a Trotskyite. But if you don't attack Stalin, if you don't participate in this anti-Stalin paradigm, you can't be in academia. Now, I teach literature, medieval literature and world literature in an English department. So my career, my livelihood does not depend upon my acceding to the anti-Stalin paradigm and, lying about Stalin in order to get published. I don't have to worry about that. But that's why I can do it, and others. And I could not do this if I were in a history department. I couldn't have a job. You couldn't publish the things that I have written if you were in a history department. And one final anecdote. I know a couple of very well-respected mainstream historians of the Soviet Union who nevertheless like me and I like them. They don't share my politics, but they like me and I like their honesty. And they have both told me at different times, Grover, if you want your books to be widely read, you want your books to be accepted by scholars of the Soviet Union, you have to say bad stuff about Stalin. You have to stick in some bad stuff about Stalin. You have to stick in some sharp criticism of Stalin, or your work will not be accepted. And my answer to them is, I'm not writing for the mainstream Soviet studies, Soviet historians, mainstream academic researchers. I'm not writing for them. I know what they're all about. They are not interested in the same things that I'm writing for. I'm writing for people like you, like those of you here at this talk, and many, many others around the world who are interested in studying the Soviet Union, getting to the truth, and learning from the experience of the world communist movement of the 20th century, so that at some point we can try again and do better and not make the same mistakes.
Okay, thank you. Judith Osterman is next, but before I go there, is Elazar in the audience? Because he had requested me by email that he should be allowed to ask a question, which certainly I'm looking for him, but I can't find him.
He was there. I did see him for
yeah, early on, but I don't see him now.
No,
but anyway, in the meantime, let's go to Judith Osterman and then gene rule. Judith, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Grover or Dr. Furr. Yeah. So, I'm wondering about the motives of the traders. It To be pro-capitalist is usually not an ideological position. It is a position where you seek self-enrichment. So, is there any evidence that any of these people benefited materially from their association with the Nazis and the Japanese and possibly other fascists? And also, what about the fact that Trotsky was Jewish? How could he associate himself with the anti-Semitic Nazis? How did he justify that? Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, well, all right. Let's move back to the lifetime of Marx and Engels. A simplified version of Marxism, maybe something along the lines that you'll read in the Communist Manifesto, appears to say, and I think it does say, that capitalism comes along and replaces feudalism. Capitalism has to perform its historical function of producing a large proletariat and industrializing. It's destined to perform this function before, and then the next stage will be a socialist revolution. Okay. In the early part of the 20th century, under the Second International, this was the position of virtually everybody in the Second International, including the left, like the Bolsheviks and the Spartacists in Germany and the Socialist Party in the United States. Their position was, capitalism has to perform its historical function, and that is to industrialize the country and produce a proletariat, and then the proletariat will make the revolution. So, fast forward to the Russian Revolution, you have a revolution, but it's in a country where capitalism is very unevenly developed. There are some industrial centers with big factories and a large working class, but the vast majority of people in the country, is basically working the land under fundamentally feudal conditions. Okay, I mean, they're not serfs anymore, but they're using wooden plows and horses to plow the ground, and it's an 80% agricultural country. So those people who had been studying Marx and Engels and the socialist movement of the Second International, to them, it seemed like the conditions to build socialism were simply not there. And then along comes the discussion after Lenin's death of whether you can build socialism in one country, which really means if the Bolsheviks can't do it, then the capitalists need to do it. Okay, the capitalists, we had a premature revolution. The capitalists didn't industrialize the country and didn't produce a basically working class country, and so therefore socialism can't work. And I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to imagine that many people thought that that was correct. Okay, Marx was a gigantic figure. The Stalin and his leadership were not gigantic figures, not yet. Trotsky was an enormously influential figure among certain people anyway, certainly among intellectuals in Russia. And there were others who also thought that socialism cannot be built in one country, and therefore capitalism has not performed its historical function. So if you read Trotsky's economic projections, and then you read the transcripts of the Moscow trials, you see that what Trotsky's plan basically was to retreat away from collectivization, away from crash industrialization, which many people thought wouldn't work, although it did work, but many people thought that it wouldn't. And basically either do what the capitalists should have done, but didn't do, industrialize the country. Bukharin thought this, right? We should take it slow. We should industrialize very slowly. It's going to take a couple of generations. And then, when we've industrialized the country, we'll be able to maybe start move towards socialism. Stalin and company said, this is never going to work. The capitalists are going to crush us. Stalin actually gave a famous speech in 1931 in which he said, we've got 10 years. We have to industrialize in 10 years. If we don't do that, we will be crushed. And, it turned out that he was exactly right. I mean, nobody knew that it was going to happen in 1941. I think 10 years was just meaning we've only got a short period of time. But that was really a very fundamental disagreement. And given the Second International, the Mensheviks, who were a powerful force in Russia, had followed the line of the Second International, and that was the line of the Second International. We need to build up the trade union movement. We need to gain more strength within the capitalist countries, so that at some time in the future, capitalism produces its gravediggers, the proletariat, and all of this is going to take, generations. And the Soviet decided not to.
It sounds like these people were operating from an obsessive compulsive disorder, where they felt that they had to adhere to a certain program.
Judith, please, I'll call upon you when the time comes. Is that okay?
Okay. I'm just commenting on.
Yeah.
I think if you cast
we're
yourself,
running out of time. We have run out of time. Yeah, go ahead, Grover, if you want.
I think if you cast yourself back into that period imaginatively, you can understand. I don't sympathize with those people. Obviously, there are, reactionary politics follows from taking the position that the Soviet Union has to fail because it doesn't follow this blueprint that Marx seemed to have laid out. But I can understand how many people did think that at the time.
Okay, I want to call upon myself because I want to make a comment on this very subject. Sure. And that is the understanding that capitalism had evolved into imperialism is the significant reason why the revolutions could not happen in the West. That was read by Lenin correctly. Lenin's essay of 1916 was crucial because he said, along with imperialism, the working class is now also divided between a section that has become bourgeois. Actually, he wasn't the first, but Lenin develops the whole theory of imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism. And that is why Lenin understood that revolution can be made in Russia because of a revolutionary peasant class, which is the majority of the peasants. So that's my read on it. It's a big subject. Maybe we should have a discussion on that one day. But I have a question for you, Grover, also, which is now Rakovsky wasn't sentenced to death. He was given 20 years, and I finished your book yesterday, by the way. And I was he was executed in 41 following German invasion of June 21st, and Beria requested 170 names of people, Rakovsky among them, who were participating in the counter-revolutionary activities, and Politburo, headed by Stalin, signed off on it. So, can you tell us more about it? Because he wasn't actually given this death sentence. Why? What did you know? Do you know anything about what was going on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, what is known about the Orel shootings in September, I think it was 1941. What is known about them, what has been published about them, I put in my book. And I pointed out that this is usually just treated as some terrible thing. And of course, the mainstream view in Russia, and of course under Gorbachev, the last years of the Soviet Union, was that Stalin was terrible. He was a monster. None of these people were guilty to begin with, let alone should they have been shot. And so there's never been any thorough research on this. And that is the case, by the way, with a great many extremely important issues in the history of the Soviet Union, that there has never been any serious research on these questions, on many questions. There was, for example, right up through to the years of to the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, there were many old Bolsheviks who were witnesses, who had participated in all kinds of very important programs and so forth in the Soviet Union, who were never interviewed, never their experiences were never written up. There were a great many important figures in the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party, who never wrote memoirs, or if they did write memoirs, they've never been published. So it's not like in the United States where any remotely significant historical event gets researched up to one side and down the other by eager graduate students and professors who want to get published and so forth. It's not like that in Russia. So nobody has ever done any serious research on this question. Now, I hint in my book that there are a few facts here and there that have never been put together before about the anti-Soviet activities of these particular prisoners in this otherwise very large prison in 1941. The prison and the city that it was in were under martial law. Under martial law, you just don't have freedom of speech. That's it. You're not allowed to go around bad-mouthing the government. But we don't have the, transcripts of or reports of what these various prisoners were saying and doing. And I assume that some of that is available, that those documents are there somewhere, but nobody has ever gone out and tried to find them. Also, they've never found the graves, but I don't think that's a significant issue because, the government says they were shot. They were probably shot. Most of the prisoners in the Oryol prison, the city is pronounced Oryol, most of the government, the prisoners were evacuated to the east. Okay, it was only this 169 or 168, whatever it was, who were involved in some sort of anti-Soviet activity, who were taken out and shot under martial law. That's it. That's all I know.
Yeah, your book says 170, but that's the detail. Okay.
Yeah, 168, 170. I think there were one or two who were on the list who who didn't get shot. I'm not sure. It's not.
Okay. All right. And so the last question, because we're running over time, and thank you for staying with us longer.
Of course.
Gene, you're the last one, and then we'll end the program. You need to unmute.
About that.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Grover. And again, I agree with you about the dominance of anti-Stalin views in this country. But there's two books. I don't know if you know them. One is by Isaac Deutscher, Stalin, a political biography, which I found very useful. And there's also another one by Al Szymanski, who taught at the University of Oregon and is deceased, but he has a book called "Is the Red Flag Flying?"
Yes.
A political economy of the Soviet Union, in which he says the Soviet Union was an authentic dictatorship of the proletariat,
Yes.
whatever that means. So I don't know if you know about those or if you have an opinion on them.
Sure. Well, Deutscher was a Trotskyite, okay, for a long time. And Szymanski was not, right? Szymanski was pro-Soviet. I read both of those books some time ago, although I have them here in my shelves. Deutscher went on to write this 3-volume biography of Trotsky, which is really an atrocity. It's just terrible. His bias, his pro-Trotsky bias, shows up in so many ways. When Jan von Hanort, who was Trotsky's longest living secretary, was interviewed for a biography. Somebody wrote his biography some years ago. He has in that book a good short criticism of Deutscher's works. Deutscher basically used the Harvard Trotsky archive because Trotsky's widow gave him access to it when nobody else had access to it. He did a very quick and dirty job. It's really not at all reliable. And of course, Deutscher started out, for many years was a Trotskyist anyway. So the problem with all books, including the few that are relatively pro-Stalin, like you mentioned, Szymanski, and there's some others, Ian Gray. The problem with all these books is they were published before the end of the Soviet Union, which means before this avalanche of documents from former Soviet archives started to be published. Okay, so that changes. These primary source documents from Soviet archives change everything. Really nothing published before about 1995 or maybe even 2000, or roughly that period. Nothing really is worthwhile, regardless of its bias, because everything has changed since we have received, since there have been made available to researchers this tremendous flood of primary source documents which can stand as evidence for the kinds of things that we're interested in. And that's reality.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Please stop the recording at this point.
Okay. Yes. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Grover.
Yeah.
Thank you.